The Russian Wagner Group just suffered their deadliest day outside of Ukraine since 2018, when they famously took on a group of U.S. Special Operations Forces in Syria. And we'll rehash that here in a second, too. But just a couple days ago, word came out that as many as 80 Wagner fighters were killed and 15 or so captured by a joint group of militants in northern Mali. We're going to do our best to break this one down to where it's easily understandable, but bear with me, it gets a little bit confusing pretty quickly. So starting out with a couple of the groups here, you've got JNIM, and we have to know this one right out the gate. That stands for Jama Nusrat al-Islam wa al-Muslimin. That is the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Africa, or in this portion of Africa. It is argued to be the fastest growing Al-Qaeda affiliate. It's a bad group. They're trying to establish an Islamic caliphate, right? Terrorists start to finish. JNIM, one of the groups in this story. The second group here, kind of broadly speaking, is CSP-DPA. Remember I said a lot of acronyms, so bear with me. I'll try to make this simpler as we go. That stands for the Strategic Framework for the Defense of the People of Azawad. And we're going to get into kind of the region that they're fighting in here, but what I want people to recognize right out the gate is you've got an Islamic terrorist organization in the Al-Qaeda affiliate of JNIM. They appear to have taken part in this raid. They hate Wagner. You've also got local rebels trying to create their own independent state. They hate Wagner. It's possible they fought together in this one instance, but we have to recognize that they're two very different entities with different end states. Now, looking into kind of some background here, a great source I came across was Zeneb Rabua, apologies for the pronunciation there, from the Hudson Institute, and I'll link her profile on Twitter in the description below, where she said Tuaregs are a large semi-nomad Berber group that adopted Islam in the 7th century. The Azawad people, which are the ones who ambushed Wagner, are also Tuaregs, but are based in northern Mali. They are not Islamic State. They are not Al-Qaeda. They are not JNIM, and they do not want to have a Sahel Maghreb caliphate. It is a common misconception as to what their goals are. They claim territories from Niger and southern Algeria, and most importantly, want to form an independent state. The people who killed Wagner mercenaries are Tuaregs, but most importantly, they're Azawad people, and they have their own demands and their own interests that should not be confused with other groups. So this is one of those cases, as we get into this, where two groups that don't necessarily like each other sometimes can come together to fight a common enemy, and that's not outside of the realm of possibilities, not outside the norm for Al-Qaeda to do that in certain instances. Keep that in mind as we move through kind of the narrative of what appears to have played out here. Now, in terms of the situation on the ground, what we're going to go with here is a description from the Wagner Group. And they've put out a handful of statements in the past couple days kind of explaining what took place. And we got to take this with a grain of salt because it's not entirely clear that any Wagner fighters survived to be able to tell the tale. That's a little still up in the air. So take this with a grain of salt. But coming from Wagner, they say from July 22nd to July 27th, Malian soldiers and soldiers of the 13th Assault Detachment from Wagner, under the leadership of Commander callsign Pond, fought fierce battles with militants from the Azawad Coordination Movement and the terrorist group Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, JNIM. So FAM here, you're talking about the military, the armed forces of Mali. And one note is that after France left Mali earlier this year, maybe it was late last year, it created a vacuum there. The government then turned to Russia to try to fill that void. And the void in that sense is to try to help stand up the Mali government and put down rebel groups throughout their country. One of those groups is this Azawad movement, the Tuaregs, right? Like we mentioned earlier, trying to stand up their own independent state in the northern portion of the country. Others are groups, terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. So Wagner is in Mali fighting alongside the Malian government, trying to put down some of these groups. So in a sense, Wagner has been fighting against really anyone that is not the official Malian government, which is why so many of these groups hate Wagner. They say on the first day, again, moving to the Wagner narrative here, they say on the first day, Pond's group destroyed most of the Islamists and put the rest into flight. However, the ensuing sandstorm allowed the radicals to regroup and increase their numbers to 1,000 people. In connection with this, the commander of the Wagner PMC decided to transfer additional forces to the combat area to assist the 13th Detachment. Over the next 2 days, the radicals increased the number of massive attacks using heavy weapons, UAVs, and suicide drones, which resulted in losses. And how about this? A couple of helicopters flew out to assist. Mi-8 and Mi-24, which were shot down. The crew of the 24 is alive. In the Mi-8, the helicopter and flight engineer were killed. And I'm going to pause there for a second because there's a couple things here worth zeroing in on. 1,000 fighters in open terrain, like we see in some of these pictures, is a lot to go undetected. And based off of how they fight and the situation on the ground, it might appear like 1,000 at a time, but that seems like a very, very big number. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in the couple hundreds. 1,000 seems a little bit unusual. But again, if they were to catch the Russian forces, the Wagner forces off guard, they could do a lot of damage with well less than 1,000 boots on the ground. 2 helicopters shot down. It sounds like these are Wagner helicopters, and this is something we've talked about since they really kind of came to prominence during the war in Ukraine, this is a group very closely aligned with the Russian military, to where they've utilized Russian aircraft in the past. They've utilized Russian field hospitals, Russian Ministry of Defense logistics routes to keep their troops in the fight. It's not clear entirely at this point if these were Russian MOD helicopters being flown by MOD pilots and crews, or if they were Wagner helicopters kind of being used by this private military company. There is a distinction there, right? It's gray at times, but there is a distinction. The note about how of 2 helicopters get shot down and only 1 pilot and 1 flight engineer were killed, I don't know that I'm going to believe that necessarily. Any helicopter getting shot down, you have a very low rate of survival for the crew. But either way, that's the Wagner statement here. They say the last radiogram from Pon's group arrived on July 27th at 1710. Quote, "The 3 of us are left. We are continuing to fight." Now, so again, when we're looking at this entire thing from the Wagner perspective, there's only 3 left, and those 3 eventually were killed and or captured. So hard to know for sure exactly what played out here from the militant side. We did get some statements from JNIM as well as from the Tutura rebels. It's much more broad. We attacked, we killed, we captured, things like that. It's not the play-by-play necessarily that Wagner is providing here. Wagner did put out some additional notes trying to dispel certain rumors that were popping up across social media. They said, according to the employees of PMC, 20 were killed. 20 Wagner fighters were killed, 5 were taken prisoner. Lotus is not among them. Lotus, right when this happened, there was a rumor that Lotus was one of the people killed. Lotus was the senior Wagner commander that led the assault and siege of Bakhmut. Very experienced, very senior commander inside of Wagner. His loss would have been substantial. And in the immediate aftermath of this attack, there were a lot of rumors circulating that he was there and was in fact killed. Wagner has since come out and said he wasn't on the ground. In turn, he wasn't killed. White, they say, the administrator of the Gray Zone Telegram channel, a Wagner-affiliated media outlet, was there, and we've seen pictures of his body since then. He was certainly killed, and the Gray Zone Telegram channel has pretty much gone dark since this attack took place. Now, when talking about how significant this battle was related to past Wagner incidents, again, if we remove their fighting in Ukraine and look at how they've been projecting power around the world, this was absolutely their deadliest day for the Wagner Group in Africa ever, and likely the deadliest day since the 2018 Battle of Qashm. Now, that was a time outside of Deir ez-Zor in Syria where around 500 Wagner fighters and pro-Assad troops attacked U.S. and Syrian Democratic forces. That fight was incredibly lopsided. A lot of U.S. air power overhead. I believe the Air Force Cross was awarded to one special operator on the ground that day. It came out in a Freedom of Information Act request just a couple years ago. But that fight resulted in somewhere between 50 and 200 Wagner fighters killed, 0 U.S. casualties, and 1 SDF fighter wounded. It was a complete rout. Right, Wagner fighters falling left and right, and the Americans walking away without a single scratch. So that is what we have to look back to in terms of how bad this fight was for Wagner. You're going back to 2018 when they tried to take on U.S. forces in Syria. Now, immediately after this took place, we did start to see some rumors that Ukraine may have been involved. And I want to treat this very carefully because it's a lot of rumors right now, and speculation about this could be very, very bad for Ukraine if it comes out in a certain manner, if something were to happen and that were to come out in a certain manner. So the couple of things to point to here is right away, as soon as this attack took place, the CSP DPA, remember from earlier, the Strategic Framework for the Defense of the People of Azawad, so the rebel movement here, not the jihadi movement, they put out a statement saying, quote, "Dear Ukrainian brothers, we have captured a significant number of Wagner's mercenaries and would like to hand over these captives to you as a sign of support and solidarity. This gesture is intended to help you in your fight for justice and freedom. We hope that this will contribute to the strengthening of our ties and our joint victory." So there's, you can read that as the strengthening of our ties means those ties are already there, right? Joint victory. They're both fighting against Russia in a way. So, we have to take that into consideration. But then we had pictures come out showing some of these Tuareg rebels holding a Ukrainian flag with some people in the picture that are supposed, they don't look like they're native Malians. It looks like they might be Ukrainians, maybe Ukrainian Special Forces advisors, something like that. It's kind of the rumor that's circulating. And kind of, piling on here, Andrei Yusov, a representative of the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, said, quote, "The rebels received necessary information which enabled a successful military operation against Russian war criminals. We won't discuss the details in the moment, but there will be more to come." And what I want to get into here is why we have to be cautious about these Ukrainian claims, because both Ukraine and the Tuareg rebels, they hate Wagner, right? A common enemy there, but so does Al-Qaeda. And it's one thing for Ukraine to align themselves with a local militia group trying to fight for their own sort of independence and a sovereign state in Mali. It's a different story entirely if something comes out that Ukraine is aligning themselves with Al-Qaeda in any way, shape, or form to take on Wagner, right? So keep that in mind as we get into this next section here. The Caleb Weiss, great analyst, put together a piece in the Long War Journal talking about how both of these groups, JNIM and then the Tuareg rebels, were both claiming responsibility for this attack and how they may have coordinated together. So he says, quote, "Both the Tuareg groups and JNIM are claiming victory individually as each released propaganda showing killed and captured Russians and destroyed and captured Russian equipment. While the two groups are engaged in a propaganda spat, it's unlikely that they did not coordinate in the battles against the Russians. Wagner sources have confirmed a high death toll among its forces, with some of its affiliated Telegram channels stating that as many as 80 Wagner troops were killed and another 15 captured. JNIM's statement does not state that it fought in the same battle as CSP, but is part of a separate confrontation with the forces. The group also claims to have killed at least 50 Wagner troops, which, if true, would account for the bulk of Wagner's losses. CSP has disputed this number, however, suggesting that its men killed most of the Russians. So both are saying that they did the majority of the damage, but a key note here in Caleb's analysis is that they're both talking about fighting the Russians, the Wagner forces in this sense, in two separate engagements. They say the CSP, or the Tuareg rebels, have denied any cooperation with JNIM in these battles. Though CSP has reasons to officially deny any such coordination, it seems likely that the two sides deconflicted with each other, at the very least to avoid clashing. At the maximum, the two communicated to drive the retreating Russians into JNIM's ambush. However, the situation also does not mean that they cannot cooperate against each other, which each group considers, quote, the bigger enemy, Mali and its Wagner allies. The arrangement benefits both groups, and Al-Qaeda specifically permits a big tent approach that allows cooperation with non-jihadists when it benefits its goals. That's a difference, as we've talked before, between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Al-Qaeda will make kind of friendships of convenience, if you will. Islamic State does not. So it's possible here that the Tuareg rebels and JNIM coordinated in a sense, at the very least, to not fight each other in the middle of this battle, both of them viewing Wagner and Mali as the greater threat. So to go back a second to the possible Ukrainian involvement, Ukraine involved with Tuareg rebels, not a problem. Providing intel or even possibly having advisors on the ground, not really a problem at all. It's if they were tied into JNIM. However, at this point, there has been no statements from JNIM about any sort of Ukrainian involvement or ties with them. Ukraine has not suggested any involvement with the Al-Qaeda affiliate here. In fact, we're hearing more and more that the two groups were separated during this engagement. They fought the same battle, but in different places at different times. So just want to make sure that that's going to be I think that's an important conversation that's going to continue to percolate across the media. Now, we did start to get some pushback across the Russian media about what happened here and why this took place. Most of what we're seeing from Wagner right now is just documenting events, kind of, paying respects to the fallen, if you will. I really haven't seen much on Wagner media calling out individuals or groups or explaining why this happened or trying to put people in blame, but that is out there. And one of the groups that dialed in on that is Rusich. This is a pretty extreme group inside of Russia. They've got ties to the Wagner organization. They say what happened in Mali is a consequence of the fact that despite their experience, all commanders who knew how to fight but had their own opinions were removed from command positions, and they were replaced by people who were comfortable and without opinions. The events that took place were expected, and we think this is just the beginning. Such a policy of the company's management, talking about Wagner, unfortunately will not result in success, but in losses. And what they're talking about there with commanders who had opinions means anybody who may have been considered an associate or a friend or an ally of Yevgeny Prigozhin. If you remember, the kind of founder of the Wagner Group, who staged a march on Moscow a little over a year ago and was subsequently he died eventually in a mysterious plane crash, if you will. And at that point, when Wagner was kind of merged into other PMCs and the company itself was kind of handed off to other individuals, portions merged into the Russian Ministry of Defense, one of the arguments was that some of the experienced leaders inside of Wagner were being removed because of their ties to Prigozhin, and to kind of wipe the slate clean of anybody who might have those ideas of rising up against Putin and the Ministry of Defense in the future. That's kind of what Rusich is pointing at here, is essentially the Wagner PMC has turned political. And they're moving people into their ranks, into their commander roles that align with the Russian Ministry of Defense, and in turn are replacing anybody who has, real battlefield experience that the Wagner commanders had through their fighting in Ukraine, other times Syria, and now in Africa. But that's about the gist of what we have right now on this ambush in Mali. A lot of the pictures and videos are pretty graphic. They show a lot of dead bodies and parts of dead bodies, so they're not going to be in this video here. I have tried to share as many of those as possible on X or Twitter. The link to that account is in the description below. We've also got some new articles up on Between the Lines, our reader-funded publication, talking about specifically the fear of escalation in northern Israel, between Israel and Hezbollah. But to bring it back to this topic, we did have an article a couple of months ago talking about how Ukraine was using special operations forces to hunt Wagner in portions of Africa. So if interested in some background on this or diving into other subjects around the world, be sure to check that out in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.